On today's episode, where does Berkly Catton rank among the top forwards eligible in this year's draft class? I'll answer that, and we'll get into Joey Anderson's report card.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm Jack Bushman, your host. Make sure to go and give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman2. And just a reminder to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff really does help me out tremendously. Go and jump in the comment section and let me know your thoughts on Berkly Catton. Where do you rank him among the top forwards eligible in this year's draft? And also go and drop that grade that you would give Joey Anderson for his performance this season. Make sure to hit that subscribe button too. Don't want to be missing out on all the great Blackhawks content that I'm going to be dropping here all throughout the summer. And last but certainly not least, got to let you know today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Sign up today and visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get up to $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone enjoyed the holiday weekend. I know I didn't have a show come out yesterday, Memorial Day, and was also a travel day for me coming back to Illinois, so I do apologize for that, but happy to get back on track, back on schedule here today, and kind of need to because there are a lot more NHL draft profiles that I have to cover, and we're starting to creep into June here, folks. We're, about a month away from the NHL draft. The Blackhawks, of course, made a trade on Friday to jump from number 20 to number 18 in the first round. Make sure to go and check out the episode that I dropped on Sunday to get my full reaction on that. But to kick things off here today, as I mentioned, got to start getting back into these NHL draft profiles. And the next man I'm going to cover is Berkly Catton. First, though, if there's someone like an Ivan Demidov, Artem Levshinov, Caden Lindstrom. I've gone over most of the top names in this year's draft already on the show. You can easily find those under the 2024 NHL profile playlist on the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. Everything's time coded in the description as well, so you can easily jump around. But getting into Berkly Catton, boy, does he have an electric offensive makeup. He's a 5'11", 170-pound left-handed center who turned 18 back in January. And how about these numbers, Blackhawks fans? 116 points in 68 WHL games for the Spokane Chiefs this past season while wearing the A. 54 goals and 62 assists in 68 games for Berkly Catton. Those the 1.71 point per game margin is actually the third highest among all WHL players over the last 20 years. The only two players that had a higher point per game margin than Berkly Catton was none other than Mr. Connor Bedard and also Sam Reinhart before he ended up going second overall. And Catton's ahead of some big-time NHL names compared to their draft-eligible years like Leon Draisaitl, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins even, who went number 1 overall, if you all remember. Who else? Matt Barzal, Braden Point, Seth Jarvis, some guys who put up some big time numbers during their draft year. Berkly Catton did better than all of them. Also chipped in for 4 points, not his best showing in 7 games for Team Canada at the U18 World Juniors. But when you're talking about Berkly Catton, as I mentioned, it's all about the lovely offensive makeup that he possesses. And I'm really, really curious to see after Macklin Celebrini, and I think the Blackhawks are going to take Ivan Demidov. If they don't, I still think he's going to be the second forward off of the board. I'd be a little upset if they didn't take him personally, though, Blackhawks fans. But I'm really curious to see who that third forward is going to be selected after those two. Is it going to be Berkly Catton or is it going to be Caden Lindstrom, who I've already covered? Cole Yzerman, probably not as likely as Lindstrom or maybe someone like Tija Ginla, who's just his stock is absolutely climbing right now. There's even some rumblings that could go as high as number 4, 5, maybe. His stock is really rising right now, but out of those guys, really fascinated to see who winds up being the third forward taken in this year's draft. As far as the rankings go, though, for Berkly Catton, he was ranked 7th by Elite Prospects, 10th by Bob McKenzie, 14th by Craig Button, That's the lowest ranking here for Catton. But then ranked as high as third by Tony Ferrari, third by Dobber Prospects, sixth by McKean's Hockey, seventh by Chris Peters, and sixth by Daily Faceoff. So most folks think he is going to go in the top 10, and a lot of them think he's going somewhere inside that, 5 to 7 pocket. Breaking down Catton's strengths and weaknesses, I mentioned the offense, baby. He's just a fully dynamic offensive player that can shoot and dish it at a high level. Although I do think he's probably going to be more of a playmaker and a passer at the NHL level, but he can absolutely score goals too. He's just got a really good offensive makeup. But the best part of his game, or the best parts, I should say, that I think is going to be most translatable to the NHL level is his speed, his edge work, and his transition game. First and foremost, the skating is awesome that he's able to use to carry the puck up the ice, enter the offensive zone. He's got great crossovers to really pick up speed in a hurry. And honestly, I think his crossovers are the best of anyone that I've seen so far based on the prospects that I've covered. He can pick up speed in a hurry. His acceleration is really good. That top level speed is really solid. Just all in all, sound skating mechanics to get up and down the ice in a hurry. And he also pairs that with a marvelous skill set and, most importantly, a super high hockey IQ, man. I don't know if there are many forwards that read the ice and defenders better than Berkly Catton. Like, the way that he sees everything happening in front of him, and also the way that he can kind of slow things down to generate open space for his teammates. Like, he can create space for his teammates. He can create space for himself. He can create space to make a pass that no one else is seeing. And just the way that he's also patient with the puck. He really doesn't force things a lot. I know this is a high compliment here, Blackhawks fans, but I'm not kidding. Like, those parts of his games, they remind me of Patrick Kane. There's a couple highlights out there where, one in particular, where Berkly Catton is skating up the ice by himself. He has a 1-on-2, but right before he enters the offensive blue line, as the defensemen are, right on top of the blue line, they don't want to let him just walk it in. What does he do? He reads what's going on around him, and he turns and makes a behind the back pass, recognizing that he has a teammate behind him entering the offensive zone with speed. And because those defensemen are so far up, he's got an opportunity to go wide and drive the net. He makes that beautiful pass. It's like he's got eyes in the back of his head. His transition game, I really think, is going to transition to the next level, Blackhawks fans. He reads defenders so well in all areas, and he's also got that stick handling ability too. It's not, just the pinpoint passing. No, he can deke it by you. He's really shifty out there, can slice and dice, and I also really like his outside to inside move. Again, his high hockey IQ is very prevalent because I think his kind of bread and butter, and he's obviously going to have to establish more moves than just this, but he loves going outside to inside because, again, he recognizes the middle of the ice is the most dangerous, so he tries to get defenders to open up like he's driving wide so that he can cut back to the middle and get that shot off. And he's able to get shots off really well under duress. Like, when he recognizes when he is driving wide and a defender goes to poke check it, he slides it under his stick and gets the shot off in a hurry. He's got good accuracy with that shot. It's not a booming release or booming wrister like a Cole Eiserman has, but he could be a 25, 30 goal scorer at the next level, even though I do think his best offensive ability is going to be that passing. I think his vision, his high hockey IQ, his passing ability, it's pretty elite. And I do think, all in all, his offensive makeup is probably the third best of any forward in this draft. Like I said, behind Macklin Celebrini and Ivan Demidov. He's just an awesome offensive player, and I think he's got a lot of parts to his game that transition to the next level. But getting into the weaknesses, it's kind of everything else. The compete can be shaky from time to time. There just needs to be a little bit more consistency there. And I think the biggest weakness and the biggest flaw and the biggest reason why he's not like a certified top 5 pick is because of the size, man. He's 5'11". And I know I talk a lot on this saying, this kid needs to gain weight. He needs to get stronger. It's a typical thing to say about a 17, 18-year-old kid. I don't know if many more in this draft need it than Berkly Catton. He is a skinny, thin kid. I think he weighed 160 pounds going into this year, now listed up to 170. He's just going to have to, I know this is cliche, but he's really going to have to get stronger in order to be a center iceman or a responsible center iceman at the next level. It feels like he's just one of those centers that if you have a reliable third line center that can be that shutdown guy, you feel better about it, but you're never really, I just don't think he's ever going to be that most reliable center that you throw out there in the big defensive moments. And also just, being a center and having to just grind against grown men in front of the net and in the dirty areas and winning puck battles. He just really doesn't do that all that much. And even his engagement in puck battles and like willing to block shots, it kind of seems like he does it when he wants to. Again, there just needs to be a little bit more consistency there to round out his game. So the weaknesses are just kind of overall his play away from the puck. His strengths are absolutely when the puck is on his stick. It's going to be really interesting to see where he winds up going. As far as a projection for Berkly Catton, no, I just think he's too talented to fall out of the top 10. I know I had Hadi Kalakesh from Locked On NHL Prospects come on the show, and he said Berkly Catton is falling. Man, I just don't see Berkly Catton falling out of the top 10. Like, no way. His offensive game is so electric. There's so much that I believe can transition to the next level. I don't care about the defensive side of things. Someone's going to want to take a gamble on him in the top 10. So ultimately, I see Berkly Catton going between number 5 and 10. Gonna be curious to see if Tisha Ginla winds up being the pick before him. But I really think if Berkly Catton was 6'1", 6'2", he'd be in the conversation with Ivan Demidov because of his offensive game. Again, just really, really translatable. In terms of a long-term fit with the Blackhawks, yeah, it would give them absolutely electric offensive-minded centers down the middle, and their transition game, like Bedard, Nazar, Moore, Berkly Catton, right? Like, it would be unbelievable. At the same point in time, though, that gives them a lot of undersized centers, and that's not usually how you win in the most meaningful time of the year. And also, I just don't think there's any way Berkly Catton goes before Ivan Demidov. I just don't. I really like his game. I like Demidov's more. So as far as him going to the Blackhawks, I just think it's really unlikely because I don't think the Hawks are going to take Catton over Demidov, and I don't think Catton's going to fall out of the top 10. So the path for the Blackhawks to land Berkly Catton is very, very small. So I see that it's not probably a likely pick here for the Blackhawks, but there's so much to like about this kid's game. Go and let me know down below in the comment section your thoughts on Berkly Catton. Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, or are we disagreeing on this prospect here? Make sure to go and let me know in the comment section. But there's my breakdown on Berkly Catton. There's his 2024 NHL Draft Profile coming up in just a moment. Don't go anywhere, Blackhawks fans, because I'm about to get into Joey Anderson's report card. But first, real quick, I got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. It's playoff time, baby, in the NBA and the NHL. Things are ramping up in the conference finals, and it's also full swing in the MLB, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. And right now, new customers can get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Yes, you heard me right. That's $150 win or lose. And you can use these bonus bets to bet on everything from, slap shots throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs, slam dunks en route to the NBA championship, or even home runs across all the great ballparks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Go and make your first bet an easy win over at FanDuel. Make sure to check out FanDuel.com/lockdown. Make your first bet an automatic winner. Get $150 worth of bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, segment 2, getting into the final handful of report cards that I got to break down here this offseason. And again, just a quick reminder, like the NHL draft profiles, I guess there's not as many in terms of report cards for me to cover, but I've already gone over most of the Blackhawks notables at this point. We're kind of getting down to the nitty gritty here, if I'm being honest. And I can always tell when it's getting to that point based on the amount of votes that these polls get on X. When we get to Joey Anderson, and spoiler alert, Arvid Soderblom is going to be next. Even like Taylor Radish, Jason Dickinson, those guys, the polls don't get as much pop on X as, Connor Bedard or Kevin Korchinski, Alex Vlasic, all those guys. But I've covered most of them at this point. If you missed out on those shows and want to hear what grade I gave them for their performance this season, go and check out the 2024 report card playlist on the YouTube channel. Again, everything's time coded in the description. So you can easily find that point in the show. But today I'm going to be getting into 25-year-old forward Joey Anderson's season recap, a former guest here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. And that made me even happier. That put an even bigger smile on my face to see the type of season that Joey Anderson had. Came on here, was a super good dude, despite, kind of being sent back up, back down, was actually down in Rockford ahead of their postseason run last year. And I'm sure he would have liked to have been a full-time NHLer, but obviously everything happens for a reason. And it was kind of the same story for Joey Anderson this year, even though he did look, not great, but he looked pretty competent in the 24 games that he had with the Blackhawks last year. But he's just kind of always been a tweener in his career, right? And we've seen him bounce around from New Jersey to Toronto, and now here to Chicago, by the way. At the time, kind of seemed just like a throw-in as part of the Jake McCabe trade, but no. Joey Anderson, not just a throw-in. He's turned out rather nicely here, but had to earn his spot on the Blackhawks. He unfortunately didn't make the roster out of training camp. I kind of figured that was going to be a rather uphill battle for him, but kind of a problem the Blackhawks have had the last few years, the injury bug. They got depleted with injuries early on in the year that forced Joey Anderson to get called up and never got sent back down, made the most of his opportunity. Getting into the numbers here for Joey Anderson, 55 games for him at the NHL level this year. It's the most that he's ever recorded in his career. His previous high was the 38 that he tallied last year, most of which came with Chicago after being acquired from Toronto. And in those 55 games, he tallied 5 goals, which is actually one short of his career high that he tallied in 38 games last year. Also chipped in for 12 assists. It's the first time that not only has he had 10 in a single season, but it's the first time that he's ever had more than 3. And then 17 points as well, a career best for him. First time in his career over 10. So career highs all across the board. Fittingly, when he gets the most opportunity, he made the most of it. So those numbers expectedly are pretty solid for Anderson compared to the rest of his career. Only had 8 penalty minutes this year as well. And considering the role that he had, like defensive minded, really put out against the opposing team's best offensive players night in and night out, for him to only have 4 minor penalties in 55 games is rather impressive. Not as impressive, though, as the plus-minus number. And I get it. There are probably some people out there saying, Jack, you don't hold the minus 44 or whatever it was against Connor Bedard. How can you be impressed with a +5 out of Joey Anderson when you talk crap about plus-minus all the time? Well, there are kind of little nuances to that. And Joey Anderson being +5 is absolutely one of them. Again, when you understand the role that he had and how difficult it was on a terrible team for a guy who had never really been a full-time NHLer in his career to be +5 on this Blackhawks team. The worst offensive team, not only in the NHL and Blackhawks history, and he was +5, best on the team in that mark. Yeah, that's incredible out of Joey Anderson. All 5 of his goals came from the even strength variety as well. What I did find interesting, though, he shot 8.8% this year and actually had the most shots that he's ever had in a season with 116. Prior to this year with the Blackhawks, he was over an 11% shooter at the NHL level. Now, used in a bottom 6 role, probably not getting very many shots in his previous stints, but, actually getting a chance here with the Blackhawks, I would have liked to see that shooting percentage be a little bit higher, but I just thought that was kind of funny. Like 8.8% for Joey Anderson on the third line, like that's pretty solid. You're never going to complain about that. But to see that he was over 10% for his career kind of surprised me. So Joey Anderson, don't be afraid to shoot that biscuit, baby. You got a pretty good thing going when you do. Time on ice, 13 career highs across the board here in terms of this section. 13 minutes and 33 seconds of time on ice, career high. 18 blocks, even though that's not a ton whatsoever, is a career high. 48 hits, career high. 30 takeaways, career high. In terms of the analytics, a 45.2 Corsi for percentage, which isn't very shocking for his role. And how about these numbers, Blackhawks fans? In 55 games this year, Joey Anderson at even strength was on the ice for 30 goals for to 32 against. I think that perfectly encapsulates how good he and Jason Dickinson and Colin Blackwell, whoever was on their wing, it was kind of a little bit of a revolving door, but those two were together a lot. I think that perfectly tells the story of how good they were defensively. First off, I think that's the closest margin I've seen out of any Blackhawks player that I've dove into so far here in the offseason, and 32 goals is definitely the fewest. That's crazy. Think about that. This Blackhawks team was downright terrible all year long. Defensively, very, very shaky. Goaltending, especially when Arvid Soderblom was in there, was not good, and he was still only on the ice for 32 goals against in 55 games. That's really impressive to me. But breaking down the good and the bad here for Joey Anderson's season, the good, I think the most impressive thing is that he just became a part of that Blackhawks shutdown third forward line that was trusted upon by Luke Richardson night in and night out, along with Jason Dickinson. They were taking on, every toughest matchup that the Blackhawks were getting. That was most of the ice time that Joey Anderson was getting, and he really thrived in that role and just established himself as a true shutdown defensive forward here in the NHL and made the most of his opportunity. Also chipped in for career highs basically across the board on the offensive side of things. I loved his compete. I loved his energy. There were not very many nights where you said Joey Anderson took this one off, and he really couldn't afford to. The Blackhawks couldn't afford to have him take nights off, and he really did it. So rarely did it. So really impressed, honestly, out of Joey Anderson. And, Jason Dickinson gets the lion's share of the credit because you are a center and you do have to do more defensively as a center than a winger does. Absolutely. But to see Jason Dickinson get Selke votes, and I know Joey Anderson was only there for 55 games. Jason Dickinson played in all 82, but part of that credit should go to Joey Anderson because he was really the right-hand man. He was Robin, if you will, with Jason Dickinson being Batman. He was in that role along with Jason Dickinson. So I think he deserves a lot of the credit as well. And hopefully he'll be able to keep the ball rolling, go and have a good training camp next year and establish himself finally as a full-time NHLer, because I do think he has those capabilities based on what we saw. And it wasn't just a small stretch, 55 games. Like I said, the consistency was pretty good in a defensive role for Joey Anderson this year. So I do think it's sustainable for him to make the team out of camp next year. Assuming he gets a contract extension, he is an RFA this summer. I just don't see a world in which the Blackhawks don't bring Joey Anderson back. That would be foolish to me. In terms of the bad, maybe I would have liked to see him, block more shots. He only had 18 and 55 games. And considering, he can be a penalty killer from time to time, and he always is in that defensive role, I would maybe like to see him block some more shots and not force the defenseman to have to rack up as many. And I would also like to see him, I know he's not the biggest guy by any means, but maybe try to throw the weight around a little bit, 48 hits in 55 games. I think he's capable of doing more than that is basically what I'm getting to. And I would have liked to see him score more than 5 goals considering the way he shot the puck throughout his career. I don't know if that's exactly sustainable for him to do year in and year out, but 5 goals in 55 games, I do think he could have chipped in for more than that. But again, he was a third liner for the Blackhawks. And this is a guy who really hadn't been an NHL regular ever in his career before. So I really don't have all that much bad to say about Joey Anderson this season. And for that reason, I'm going to give him an A- for his performance this year. Maybe I have a sweet bit of bias because he's been on the show before. But yeah, go and drop your grade down below. What grade would you give Joey Anderson for his performance here this season? I was really interested by the poll on X because 49% of the voters said B. I think that's fine. Even I recognize I might be a little too high on Joey Anderson, even though I was thoroughly impressed with what he did this year. But 37% said C. That was the second most popular vote. That kind of caught me off guard, but this one really did. 6% said A. Okay, but 8% said D/F. More people thought Joey Anderson deserved a D or an F than an A. I think that's absolutely crazy. Do you think that's crazy? Go and let me know down below in the comment section. And again, also go and follow @TalkinHockey on X so you can vote on all of these polls when I drop them. And you don't just have to drop your reaction in the comment section. Make sure to go and do that. But that is going to take care of Joey Anderson's 2023-2024 report card. I think I only have 3, at most 4 more players to get into here on the show before I get into my Blackhawks summer 2024 top 10 prospects list. You don't want to miss out on that. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. But before I wrap things up here in a moment, I know it's Tuesday, but I pushed things back one day. Still got to get into a decently beefy Mailbag Monday fan segment. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, just a reminder, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you very much. It really does help me in growing the show. And also, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. Plus, our national shows covering every single league. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, segment 3. Still have to get into Mailbag Monday. I know it got pushed back to Tuesday here because of the holiday, but I still have a ton of questions that I got to answer here on the show. And again, a reminder, if you have a question right now, you're watching this saying, oh, I want Jack to answer my question, make sure go and drop that down in the comment section below right now. I also have a tab under the community section on the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. You can DM me, email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. There's lots of avenues for you to reach out and ask your questions. And I really appreciate when you do, because I love this segment. I love answering them for you, but it can only go on if you do reach out with your questions. So make sure you do that, and I'll be sure to answer them this time on the show next Monday. It won't be on Tuesday. I'll be sure Mailbag Monday will be on Monday next week. But the first of several questions that I'm going to answer here comes from Rafael Meneses. Rafael, a longtime listener, a longtime follower. Really appreciate you, Rafael. He asked, I see this 18th pick. The Blackhawks, of course, just acquired that from the New York Islanders on Friday. Interesting timing. I'm literally at the golf course covering a golf tournament. I'm right by the 18th hole. Maybe 2 minutes earlier, Scotty Scheffler chipped in for par to end his round. The 9th hole, yeah, because he finished on the back. Sorry that I'm rambling here. Anyways, just looking down at my phone, the Blackhawks make a trade. I'm like, now? Really? Now they had to go do that? Anyways, Raphael asked, I see this 18th pick as a trade asset more than KD looking for a specific player on the board. What are your thoughts? I think it could be a little bit of both, Raphael. I think there are a couple players that they probably have in mind when they made this trade, but also one thing that's kind of been speculated and put out there by draft analysts and scouts, and as I've done more research, I've noticed this. A lot of folks are mentioning there's a drop-off after maybe the top 15, the top 16 in the first round. Those top 15 are the guys you really want to pursue. And while trading up, you could think only 2 spots, does it really make that much of it does. It really does make that much of a difference, especially in the first round. So I think it's probably a little bit of both, Raphael. I think there are guys that they have in mind that they're hoping could fall to number 18, or maybe they possibly use that as part of a trade package. I'm sure it's a little bit of somewhere right in the middle there and a little bit of both. Next question comes from @ShimmerDay1664, who asked, who do you think the Blackhawks take at number 18 if they stay home? Yeah, this is a really good question. I do think Kyle Davidson has something in mind potentially, and I would not be surprised to see him make a move during the first day of the NHL draft. We obviously saw him try to make that move to get Oliver Moore last year. Fortunately, he still ended up falling right in their lap, but I forget who actually brought this up in the comment section, but someone mentioned that maybe Kyle Davidson wanted to make this move now because he knew on draft day when teams want to make moves, they're maybe a little bit more desperate. They'll give up a little bit more than they want. And Kyle Davidson potentially by making this move avoided that situation, although I do think he's still going to remain aggressive if someone falls out of the top 10 who they like. As far as who at number 18, if they do stay home, that I like, and these are all guys that I'm going to absolutely be covering here in the next couple of weeks. Liam Greentree is someone that I'm interested by. Sasha Boisvert, a very tough name for me to say for some reason. Because I want to say Bois. I want to say Boisvert, but it's not. It's Boisvert. So he's interesting, and there have been ties to him and the Blackhawks. There have been rumors out there. So Sasha is probably going to be one of the first ones out of the Big Ten here in my draft profiles. Michael Hage from the Chicago Steel, I think, is really interesting as well. And that's a relationship and a connection that the Blackhawks have had, obviously, for a handful of years. And then Michael Brandzeg, knee guard, I think is really interesting as well. Played for Norway at the World Juniors, has a lot of speed. Those are kind of the 4 guys from down there, assuming that no one falls ridiculously, that I think the Blackhawks could have interest in, should have interest in with the 18th overall selection if they stay home. Next question comes from Todd Owen, Oien. Tough one to pronounce, Todd. I apologize if I butchered it. Todd asked, is it too much to dream of a line number 1 being Bedard, Stamkos, and Kane? Yes. I think Blackhawks getting one of those 2 guys is unlikely. I just don't see them dropping money on Steven Stamkos here this summer, even if he's not going to get paid like a top player, because, he's getting to, I don't want to say the end of his career, but he's certainly getting up there in age. I just I don't think that move necessarily makes sense for the Blackhawks right here, right now. I think they're probably going to be waiting to throw out big-ish change till next summer. And then for Patrick Kane, I outlined that on Sunday. I just don't think the timing lines up, man. If this were 2 years down the road and the Blackhawks were ready to go and compete again, then yeah, maybe. But I personally think it's a bit of a long shot. Next question comes from PHHDVM on YouTube, who asked, question, I see the Hawks traded up and now have the number 18 pick instead of 20. Do you think that will make much of a difference? Do you see someone that they could get at 18 that might not fall to 20? Yeah, all four of those guys that I just mentioned all have interest around their name and sound like, because I mentioned there's kind of that cutoff after 15, it sounds like those are the high end guys after that little bit of a gap. So those are probably the four that I'm interested in, but it really could make a bit of a difference in terms of even just one pick in the first round can really make a difference, because the first round is usually when you get your bread and butters. Yeah, guys can develop from the later rounds, but it just doesn't happen as frequently. So even just one pick can really actually make that much of a difference in NHL drafts, just in terms of the upside that players truly possess. It falls every spot you drop from number one overall. Next question comes from @ScottWestright, who asked, what's the best case scenario for the Blackhawks in the first round this year, Jack? I think Ivan Demidov has to be the pick at number 2. I mentioned to my boy Sam Knuth, shout out you, Sam, if you're watching this. I mentioned this to him earlier today, and I haven't really said it like this on the podcast yet. I'd be a little ticked off if the Blackhawks didn't take Ivan Demidov number 2 overall. I actually would. I think it's just pretty clear that he's the pick. If Macklin Celebrini wasn't in this draft, he'd be the number 1 overall pick. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about it. And there is intrigue in Artem Levshinov because he's a big right-handed defenseman who I think is reliable defensively and just had over a point per game or close to a point per game. I forget with Michigan State this year, obviously. There's a lot to like there. I still don't think his ceiling is even close to Ivan Demidov's if he works out. So Demidov at 2, and I think if the Blackhawks, I know they need defensemen. I think if the Blackhawks can come away with Ivan Demidov and Cole Yzerman in this draft, if Cole Yzerman falls out of the top 10, go get him, KD. I know it's risky, but if he pans out, you could come away with the Ivan Demidov's runway is so high, he could have a higher ceiling than Macklin Celebrini if he works out. I don't think that's that crazy to say. I think Macklin Celebrini is going to be the better player. I think Macklin Celebrini is the undoubted number 1 overall player in this year's draft. But if everything works out for Ivan Demidov, he can be just as good, if not better, than Macklin Celebrini. If you can come away with that and Cole Yzerman, a guy who I think, look, I know there's not a lot to love about his game other than the goal scoring, but I think he has a release that would be top 10, top 15 in the NHL immediately, and pairing that lefty shot up with Bedard as a winger, that would be electric. So that's kind of my home run slam dunk for the Blackhawks in this year's draft. Next question comes from @DaveKeith7796. Just wanted to throw in there because he asked, what about Sasha Boyve? See, I did it again. Boyver. I don't know why that name is so hard for me to say. I'm just going to call him Sasha. What do you think about Sasha at 20? Give him a review, Jack. Dave, I promise I'm going to be covering Sasha sometime sooner rather than later, possibly even this week. Next question comes from @Matthew McGurgan9368 on YouTube, who asked, do you see the Blackhawks trading up from 18, and who would you want if they did? I mentioned Cole Yzerman, some other guys who I maybe could see falling that could be interesting. Berkly Catton, I don't see him falling, but boy, I would be interested if he did. I mentioned Zane Parekh. I think Zane Parekh could fall a little bit, and I wouldn't hate that if the Blackhawks went and got him, even though he is more offensive-minded and not the biggest body. I still think his skill set, you can't really pass that up, and adding that right-handed defenseman into the system. So he's someone that I would be interested kind of in that range. But Cole Yzerman is really the one that I think can fall out of the top 10. He's not the belle of the ball like he was a year ago, along with Macklin Celebrini. I could see him slipping, considering how many guys' stocks are on the rise right now. That's the guy that I would love to go get. Will I be right about that? Only time will tell. Last question here comes from @RaiderStein-QL4YJ on YouTube, who asked, MHL, is it not a great place to forecast players, and why was Demidov demoted from the KHL? The MHL is not a great league to forecast players from, even though we have seen several Russians do very well in that league, like, Evgeny Malkin, so on and so forth. We've seen guys shine there. It isn't a predictable league. It's not a very good junior league. And I will say, I'm obviously impressed by Demidov, but his numbers in the MHL don't really mean all that much, to be quite frank, because it is that type of league. So I will admit it's not a great league to forecast players from. I'm still impressed by the overall makeup and the ceiling and the runway and the creativity that Ivan Demidov possesses. And why was he demoted from the KHL? I firmly believe he only played 4 games there early on in the year, didn't get much of an opportunity. And Russia's politics, man. He hasn't signed an extension there. They know that he's probably going to leave after this year. I don't even know if he's going to get many KHL games in this season because of that factor. So, yeah, that definitely goes into it. Him not signing that extension, I think, is probably a big part of it. But even if he did get demoted from the KHL, 17, 18-year-old kid, not many do play in the KHL at that age. So no harm, no foul there. I still think if you watch him on tape, you're going to absolutely fall in love with this kid. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show, and make sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast. And even if you're someone who just regular tunes in through an audio platform, make sure to go and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. It won't cost you anything, and it really does help me out in a big way. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you can also get all the latest videos as soon as they're uploaded each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can check me out on X at Jack Bushman2. Go follow at Talkin' Hockey as well, so you can vote on all the rest of the report cards that I'm going to be doing here over the next 4 or 5 days. All right, that's going to wrap up today's show, everyone. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your days. I'll see you on the next episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.